Mixing with Mike, plugin of the week is the Slate Digital The Monster. Finally, after a bit of a wait, we've got the missing component from the 1176. If you are familiar and you have the Slate Digital products, one that's been there for quite a little while, I'll just throw it in front, is the FG116. And what this is a replication of the 1176 with a few extra features, as Stephen Slate is great at doing. And then recently, a few months ago, what came out as of the release of this video, what came out were two editions, which was the Blue Stripe edition, right? So this was the black stripe, this is the blue stripe, and then there was also another modified version. I'm sorry, this was the modern version, which has got some other modifications built into it, and saturation circuitry and all that sort of stuff. And then the standard blue stripe emulation. So one is an older revision. This is a newer make of his own. And what was missing from all of these was the all buttons setting. And so what that is, if you're just not familiar with it, if you take all of the ratio buttons and you push them all in at the same time on the hardware unit, they would actually stay in. And you could actually put it in different combinations. And what would happen is it would put it into a sort of hyper saturation compression mode. Essentially, what it was doing, it had something to do with the bias circuitry and the way that the bias circuitry works. So it would create a saturation type of effect and a super hyper compression. Now, the compressor itself, the 1176 compressor, has a very fast attack time. What's interesting about it, if you start going into the actual settings themselves, because if you take these basic four knobs at the top of the monster, essentially you have what makes up the 1176 compressor plus the ratio controls. So that's essentially what you have. So essentially there is no threshold. You have a fixed threshold. You bring up the input gain to determine how much signal passes above threshold. Then you have an attack setting which ranges from basically 20 microseconds up to 800 microseconds. So this is the number 7 is the actual fast setting. So this would be the fastest setting. And then this would be the slowest setting. So it's a little bit opposite of what you would expect. So if you're doing something that's really aggressive, faster attack, it'll go there. And you think that doesn't sound like a whole lot of variation because essentially it's less than a millisecond. And part of the reason why it was popular, this compressor, was because of the responsiveness of it, how fast it was, the FET circuit, right? So a FET is a field effect transistor, and it's meant to be somewhat transparent in a similar way that a VCA component is transparent. But when you start to push, and they're both very reactive. One of the great things about those two types of circuits is that you can get them to respond very quickly because you're not counting on physical components like tubes for the saturation and compression or optical components. So that was the sort of revolution of these styles of compression. And in the release time, which I believe on its fastest setting is somewhere in the 60 to 100 millisecond range. I think it's closer to 60. I'm forgetting the numbers off the top of my head, and then it slows down to reasonably slow, but not extremely slow on the setting side. Sorry about not getting all the numbers here correct. And then what you have here is an input and an output setting. And those are just a matter of just determining how much you want it to compress. On the output stage, you're balancing the output so that when you bypass it, it's not twice as loud or 10 times as loud or half as loud. And the rest of it is features that have been added in by Slate. So I'm just going to bypass this so we don't end up with any kind of double processing here. The punch, what this does is it affects the, what I believe it does is it affects the attack time. He doesn't really say exactly what it does. Essentially, one of the problems with having a really fast attack on this is it can swallow up some of the transient. The idea of having the punch probably is akin to the anniversary edition of the 1176. And in the anniversary edition of the 1176, which was released, I would say in the 2000s somewhere, it had a slow setting, which shifted the attack time down to 10 milliseconds. And this was something that was not in any vintage components. So it was one of those things that got modified in. And basically, that is what this is doing. Now, whether they emulated that particular circuit, I have no idea. They won't even say the word 1176. So that's kind of part of the deal on that end. Another thing that's really helpful that's not part of the original is a high pass filter. So this allows you to roll off low frequencies. Quite often, if you have something with a lot of energy or kick with a lot of energy, it may be driving too much of the gain reduction relative to a snare if you're using it on something like drums. The idea then being that by pushing this circuit, you can filter off the sidechain circuit. So this is not in the audio signal. You could filter off in the sidechain circuit some of that low-end energy, which makes the compressor more responsive. On the other side, what we have here is a high-frequency detection. And what you could do with this is kind of interesting. It actually boosts high frequencies or makes them more dominantly part of the processing. So again, what you're getting with the original unit is sort of fixed and you have no adjustment on it. And this is like filtering for the sidechain. And a very few vintage components make that available on the surface. Sometimes you have it as a back setting, and once you calibrate it and set it up, you would just leave it. Sometimes studios would modify those settings to the front panel where you could adjust them. But this is something that's purely modified in. This is something that is a creation of Stephen Slate. So what this does is it exaggerates more high-frequency energy so it's more responsive to transients. And then you have a mix control. And what this does is it allows you to work it as a parallel process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on a track here. And I'm just going to kind of set up just some drums here for a second. And let's just... All right, so we just want to hear our track here without any kind of processing here. Now this is in a permanent all button mode. So this is meant to be alternative. And the idea of having this side by side is that you could compare one type of sound using our standard ratio and then do something where you just kind of crush. Let's pop it into circuit. So you can hear the aggressiveness. So if I increase the attack, you can hear how it swallows up the transient. Oh, this is with the punch in. So let's start without that in. So you hear how it swallows it up. This just eats up more of the transient energy. So sometimes it's a reason, like if you want like a room track or something on drums to kind of push back in the speakers, you could put a fast attack on it just on the room and get that to breathe really heavily, and then you create this real amazing depth. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a slower attack time to allow some of that transient energy to pass through. And then we have the release control. So we have a pretty heavy-duty compression, and the idea of this is that you generally are looking for this somewhat heavy-duty compression. All right, so I had actually filtered something here, but you can see like the kick drum is driving a little bit more of the attack energy. And if I take this away, you can see how the snare is driving more of it, or that clap. So I'm trying to get a balance of that kick and snare energy so that the pumping and breathing is kind of moving, and I'll set the release time to a musical value. So if I slow it down, it'll have more of a smoothing kind of effect, help to balance the RMS energy. This is just a pure feel thing, so I'm just slowing it down to get it to kind of breathe a little bit more of a musical value. So let's just bypass this. I'm going to balance the output here. so now that I got that basically set, I can make the high frequency detection. That would be the other way to counter the kick drum energy. So just trying to balance that out so the high frequency detection will help you with there. Now I can, if I use the punch feature, this should make the attack a bit more aggressive. So the idea there is if the attack time slows down, you allow the transient to kind of pop through, and then when the compression kicks in, it pulls back on some of the RMS energy, which makes it, and then the release kind of swells it in and out. And so what you do is you get this sort of boomerang effect of movement where the attack cuts through, it snaps back, and then snaps back forward again. And then you get this, you create this depth movement that occurs. And then what I can do here is I can start to blend this in with a little bit of a mix control. So this is just on a stem as a parallel. So this is like a classic thing that you would use on a rock track, but you can feel just like the depth that and focus that it brings into the drums. And that what appears to be a bit more top end is not anything being added by the compression, but the movement of the compression pumping and breathing. Helps to create that air, or that movement. Now I could attempt to copy this basic thing here over to the guitar stem and the keyboard stem, although the settings are probably going to be different. Some risers, down risers, I guess. So I'm going to keep the settings very quickly the same, but just to kind of give an idea of what the effect of that on the overall mix. Of course, there's a bit of gain added in there, especially in quieter sections, because the compression is not going to drive as much. So when you take away that, it's like bringing the strings up in this case. Just ride it through this chorus section. So here the what makes this all setting so special is that ability, that pumping and breathing movement. So and I think one of the keys to making it work really well, and part of what makes this so powerful, these added in features of the high pass filter and the high frequency detection, and the punch control, what it does is it allows you to, it gives you the flexibility to really shape the characteristic and the way it works. Because one of the problems that a lot of people have in working with this is that they get inconsistent gain reduction. So what will end up happening is that if you're getting, like you can see here when we're working this, I'm getting a consistent probably 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction, and it's pretty consistently moving kick snare all in that energy level or area. And if I'm kind of doing that and getting that consistent kind of movement, then I'll get a consistent kind of pumping pattern that really makes it work. But if you're sometimes getting 20 and you're sometimes getting 3 and you're getting a lot of wild variation, what happens is you get this inconsistency with it. And then all of a sudden it sounds suffocated in certain places and not doing enough in other places. And so that's where the extra settings in here are so helpful, because it allows you to shape the way that that works. And that is unusual or unique. That was not part of the original. A lot of times these were used on like drum parallel chains and on room mics and stuff, where a lot of the energy of a room is somewhat evened out, so it makes it a lot easier to kind of run this and process it. And also, there are none of these that have the original units didn't have a sidechain input, an external sidechain input where you could feed the dry signals in and balance them out going in. So this is something that is really unique and really great, amazing adaptation to it, and also a great emulation of the character and the vibe and the sound of it. So this is a nice addition to the Slate collection, and now there are 4 options that you have in terms of working with 1176 FET style processing through the Slate Digital Mix Rack. And this is the plugin of the week, the Monster by Slate Digital.